This is the walkthrough for Lab 2, Newton's Laws. In Part 1, we're going to weigh the ILab device. So when we go over to the software, under the sensor list, we're going to check off force. So this will give us a force versus time graph. And before we actually weigh the ILab device, I just want to show you something quick. If you press record here, sometimes the sensor will not be starting at 0, so it might be off just a little bit. And if you notice that, just come down here and press the re-zero sensor button, and that will bring it right back to 0 for you. All right. So to weigh the ILab device, we'll press record. We'll just pick up the device by the force sensor, which is the screw with the eye hole in it. And so we'll lift it up, and you'll notice we're starting to collect data for force. All right, and then you should be able to determine the weight of the ILab device from this. Now in Part 2, we're going to look at the relationship between F&A, or force, and acceleration. So for this, we're going to have to also check off the accelerometer. So now we have an accelerometer, or acceleration versus time graph, and we're going to uncheck the AX and the AZ. All right, because AY is all we're concerned about. That's the acceleration in the Y, or the vertical direction. And so we'll press record, start collecting data, and we'll pick up the ILab device, again by the force sensor, and we'll just kind of bob it up and down a few times, and press stop. And then from this graph, you should be able to learn something about the relationship between acceleration and force. Now, you're going to look at the parametric plot mode, which, if you look right here, there's two different modes. There's chart mode, which you normally will use, and then we can click on parametric plot mode. And so all the way down on the bottom here, we have some red and blue lines, and these are the lines from your chart mode, okay? And they're just put down there on top of each other. So you can click and drag over the area, the part where you were bobbing the device up and down, and you'll get this line here. So from this line here, you'll be able to determine the mass of your ILab device. Now part 3 is friction. And so for this part, you're going to need to find two different surfaces to pull the ILab device on, as well as two different objects of different masses to put on the ILab device. So what I'll show you for the first trial here is I'm going to use the ILab device and pull it on a tabletop. Okay, so the actual frictional force we're measuring in this scenario is the friction between the tabletop and the bottom of the ILab device, which in fact, if you look at it, is felt. There's two felt pads is what will actually be sliding against the table. So we're measuring the frictional force between the table and the felt. Okay, so we'll put some masses on there. All right, so this is going to be my first trial, so it's my first amount of mass. And you're going to want to make sure you weigh the mass that you put on it as well, because you're going to need to know that for your calculations. So you're going to pull it by the force sensor, just kind of gradually until it starts moving, and once it starts moving, just pull at it with a constant speed for a couple seconds. And it might take you several tries. You might have to zoom in a little bit, but you should get a graph that looks something like this. So the parts that you want to make sure that you're seeing is this giant dip down here, and it comes down to this peak, and then it jumps up a little bit and kind of levels off here. So that's what you really are looking for in your trials here. So make sure that when you go to collect your data, you get back out of parametric plot mode, We won't need the accelerometer anymore. Then in part 4, we're going to look at the tension in strings. And so for this part, you're going to need to use both of the ILab devices. So if you go over to the software, you'll notice up here where it says Remote 1, it's a drop-down menu. And you can choose to display one or both of the remotes. So we're going to click on both remotes and check off the force sensor for the second remote. So you're going to look at 3 figures here. In the first figure, you're going to look at what the tension in the string would be if you just hold the ILab device by a string. So you're going to tie a string to your ILab device. So before you actually measure the tension in the string, I want you to just kind of think about it for a second. What do you think the tension's going to be? Right? And then you'll go over to your software. We'll click record. We'll lift up the device by the string, and the force sensor will measure the tension in the string for us. Okay, then in the next figure, we have 2 ILab devices hanging on a pulley. So you're going to need to connect the second ILab device to the first with a string. And you probably don't have a pulley at home. If you have a little one, go ahead and use it. If not, you can just use your finger in place of the pulley. So I'm just using my pointer finger here and lifting them up, and you can get some data that way. So it doesn't really matter that it's not a pulley because they're the same weight, so nothing's going to move anyway. And then for step 4 and figure 6, you can use 2 fingers in place of the 2 pulleys. And that's it for Lab 2.